My name is Michael Reeves. I live, or I should say, lived, in a suburban neighborhood just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, in a town called Lexington. It's one of those picturesque New England communities with tree-lined streets, historic, colonial homes, and an almost storybook quality that makes you feel like you've stepped into the American dream. Our house was a restored four-bedroom colonial with dark blue shutters and a wraparound porch where we'd spend summer evenings watching the sunset while sipping wine. I planted a Japanese maple in the front yard the day we moved in, telling Rachel it would grow alongside our marriage. That tree is still there, now 15 feet tall, outlasting the relationship it was meant to symbolize that I'm 37 years old and work as a senior financial consultant for Anderson and Blackwell, one of the most prestigious firms in Boston's financial district. I specialize in wealth management for high-net-worth clients, helping them navigate complex investment strategies and estate planning. It's demanding work that requires long hours and absolute precision, but I've always thrived under pressure. My colleagues describe me as meticulous, patient, and analytical, traits that would later serve me well in ways I never anticipated that I met Rachel during our senior year at Boston University. We were both in the business school, though she focused on marketing while I pursued finance. I still remember the first time I saw her in our international business class, confident, articulate, with this infectious laugh that could make even our most serious professor crack a smile. She had long auburn hair that caught the light when she moved, and these intelligent green eyes that seemed to see right through people. It wasn't just her beauty that attracted me. It was her ambition, her quick wit, and the way she approached life with such enthusiasm. Our relationship developed naturally over coffee study sessions and group projects. We dated for 3 years before I proposed on a weekend trip to Maine, on a rocky outcropping overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. We married 2 years after graduation in a ceremony at her parents' estate in Connecticut, surrounded by 150 of our closest friends and family. Her father, a retired judge, gave a toast about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of honesty that now seems tragically ironic. For almost 10 years, we were the couple everyone in our social circle envied. We hosted dinner parties where Rachel's culinary skills shone. We took annual vacations to destinations across Europe and the Caribbean. We were active in local charities and our alumni association. Our professional lives flourished in tandem. As I climbed the ranks at my firm, Rachel ascended to marketing director at Apex Innovations, a fast-growing tech company specializing in healthcare software. We weren't just husband and wife. We were partners in every sense, supporting each other's careers and dreams with unwavering dedication. Or so I thought. Rachel was everything I'd ever wanted in a spouse: intelligent, passionate, and seemingly devoted. She had this ability to make anyone feel like the most important person in the room. Her colleagues adored her for her creative vision and collaborative leadership style. Our friends valued her thoughtful advice and genuine interest in their lives. Every year on my birthday, she would plan elaborate surprises, from a private cooking class with a renowned chef to a helicopter tour of the New England coastline. I reciprocated with equal enthusiasm, learning her favorite flowers, peonies, not roses, and remembering the small details that made her feel cherished. We had our routines that anchored our busy lives together. Friday night dates were sacred, no work calls, no checking emails, just us reconnecting after hectic weeks. Sometimes we'd try new restaurants in Boston's North End or catch a show at the Huntington Theater. Other times, we'd simply stay home, cooking together while dancing to our favorite jazz playlist. Sunday brunches were another tradition, either hosting friends on our patio or discovering hidden gems in Cambridge or Somerville. During summer weekends, we'd escape to Cape Cod, where we rented the same cottage in Wellfleet year after year, collecting memories like seashells along the shore that we discussed having children eventually, but agreed to establish our careers first. Last year, we had started tentatively planning, converting the guest room into a potential nursery, researching the best school districts, though Lexington's were already excellent, and even setting up a special savings account for future education costs. Rachel had begun taking prenatal vitamins, and I'd cut back on work travel to ensure I'd be present when we started trying. The nursery paint swatches were still taped to the wall when I discovered the truth about our marriage. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was. The signs were there: accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon, but I chose to see only blue skies. Perhaps it was willful ignorance, or perhaps it's simply human nature to trust the person who holds your heart. Either way, the fall from that height of trust was devastating in ways I couldn't have imagined. The changes in Rachel were subtle at first, like a photograph slowly losing clarity around the edges. It started approximately 7 months before everything fell apart, around the time Apex Innovations began pursuing a major contract with a healthcare conglomerate. Rachel started working late more frequently, once or twice a week initially, then gradually increasing to 3 or 4 nights. Nothing inherently suspicious about that. I understood the demands of high-stakes business development and respected her dedication to her career. This client could double our market share, she explained one night after arriving home at 10:30 p.m., kicking off her heels by the door and collapsing onto our sofa with obvious exhaustion. David thinks we can revolutionize their entire patient management system if we get this contract. David Wilson. Even then, his name appeared frequently in her work anecdotes, though I thought nothing of it. As vice president of operations, he oversaw the implementation side of Rachel's marketing strategies. Their collaboration made professional sense. Their departments needed to work in tandem to deliver on promises made to clients. He was someone I'd met at company holiday parties. Tall, conventionally handsome in that corporate way, with an excessive handshake and the practiced charm of someone who'd risen through sales ranks. He had a wife named Elaine, a former pharmaceutical representative who now stayed home with their 2 children in their Brookline mansion. 3 months into this new intense work period, Rachel's appearance began to change. She scheduled appointments at a high-end salon in Back Bay, trading her shoulder-length haircut for a more sophisticated layered style. Her wardrobe evolved too. More form-fitting dresses, higher heels, and lingerie I'd never seen before appearing in her drawer. When I complimented her new look, she smiled mysteriously. Just thought it was time for a change. Don't you like it? Of course I did. She looked stunning, but something about her motivation felt opaque, as though I was only seeing the surface of a deeper transformation. Her gym visits increased from our usual twice-weekly sessions together to almost daily workouts, often early in the morning before work or during lunch breaks. She hired a personal trainer named Marcus who specialized in sculpting workouts, a term I hadn't heard before. When I suggested joining her for Saturday morning fitness classes as we'd done for years, she deflected. Marcus has me on a specialized routine. You'd be bored, honestly. Then came the digital distance. Rachel had always been transparent with her devices, not because we snooped on each other, but because we shared so much of our lives that privacy barriers seemed unnecessary. We knew each other's phone passwords, used a shared cloud account for photos, and often answered each other's phones if one of us was driving or cooking, until suddenly, that stopped. I noticed her changing her phone password one evening as we watched television. When I raised an eyebrow, she explained casually, "Work security protocol. We have to change passwords monthly now because of some data breach at a competitor." It sounded reasonable enough. But then I noticed how she angled her screen away when texting, how she took calls in another room or stepped onto the porch for better reception, and how her phone now always landed face down when set on surfaces. Once, when her phone chimed with a notification while she was showering, I glanced at the screen out of habit and saw a message preview from David W. that simply read, "Can't wait for," with the rest hidden. When I mentioned later that David had texted, she became uncharacteristically flustered. "Oh, what did he say?" "Couldn't tell. Just saw his name pop up." She nodded too quickly. "Probably about the client presentation tomorrow. We've been fine-tuning it all day." One Wednesday evening, when Rachel said she'd be working late on quarterly marketing reports, I decided to surprise her with dinner from her favorite Thai restaurant. When I called her office line to ask what she wanted, her assistant Jennifer sounded confused. Rachel left around 4. She said she had a dinner meeting with the Southwood client. I thanked Jennifer and hung up, a hollow feeling expanding in my chest. When I called Rachel's cell phone, I could hear ambient noise in the background, clinking glasses, indistinct conversations, soft music. "Hey, just checking in. How's the report coming along?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. There was a momentary pause before she answered. "Oh, we decided to work on it over dinner instead. The conference room was too stuffy. We're at Imperium." Her voice sounded slightly higher than usual, a tell I recognized from the rare occasions when she'd lie about small things like the price of an expensive purchase or whether she'd eaten the last piece of cheesecake. Imperium was an upscale restaurant. Downtown, known for its intimate atmosphere and extensive wine list. Not exactly where a team would go to work on quarterly reports. Sounds nice. Who all is there? I asked, still maintaining neutrality in my tone. Just the marketing team. David stopped by briefly but had to leave for another engagement. That night, when she returned home around 11 p.m. with flushed cheeks and smelling of unfamiliar cologne, I pretended to be asleep. I heard her shower running for longer than usual before she finally came to bed, careful not to wake me as she slipped under the covers without the goodnight kiss that had been our ritual for years. One night, about 5 months before everything unraveled, I walked into our home office to find Rachel smiling at her phone, her expression soft and secret in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. When she noticed me standing in the doorway, she quickly turned the phone over on her desk, her smile evaporating. "Hey, didn't hear you come in," she said, shifting in her chair. "Anything interesting?" I nodded toward her phone. Her defensive reaction caught me off guard. "Do I question you about every text you get? I'm just catching up with friends." The Rachel I knew, the woman I'd shared my life with for a decade, was never secretive or short-tempered about trivial matters. She'd always freely share funny texts from her college friends or interesting industry news from colleagues. This new guarded behavior felt foreign, like watching someone I'd known my entire life suddenly speaking a different language. The disconnect was jarring, like trying to complete a puzzle with a piece that almost fits but doesn't quite click into place. As weeks passed, other small inconsistencies accumulated. Credit card statements showed lunch charges at restaurants, near hotels rather than her office. Her usual perfume was occasionally supplemented by a different scent I didn't recognize. Weekend errands took longer than they should have. Conference calls happened during unusual hours, sometimes coming from our guest bathroom with the door locked and shower running to create background noise. Each discrepancy had a plausible explanation when viewed in isolation. Collectively, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. The woman I trusted most in the world was hiding something significant from me. The question was no longer if something was happening, but what exactly it was, and how bad the truth would be when finally revealed. 3 months of growing suspicion and sleepless nights finally led to the confirmation I had been simultaneously dreading and seeking. It was early April, the beginning of spring in Massachusetts, when winter's grasp finally loosens and the city begins to thaw. Rachel announced she would be attending a 3-day marketing conference in Chicago that weekend, an annual industry event she'd attended in previous years. "The agenda looks amazing this year," she said over dinner 2 nights. Before her departure, sliding her tablet across the table to show me the conference website. "They've got speakers from Google and Apple discussing AI integration in marketing analytics." I nodded with interest, asking appropriate questions about which sessions she planned to attend and whether any of her industry contacts would be there. She answered enthusiastically, mentioning that several colleagues from Apex would also be attending. "Is David going too?" I asked casually, watching her reaction carefully. She took a sip of wine before answering, her eyes briefly flicking away from mine. "No, he's got meetings with potential clients in New York that weekend. Jennifer and Mark from my team are coming though." The days before her trip followed our usual pattern. I helped her select outfits appropriate for business casual conference sessions and networking events. We discussed which restaurants she should try in Chicago. She had a list of recommendations from a colleague who'd lived there previously. On Friday morning, I drove her to Boston Logan International Airport for her 10:45 a.m. flight to O'Hare, kissing her goodbye at the departure's drop-off area. "Have a great conference. Learn something brilliant to share when you get back," I said, hugging her tightly. "I will. Love you," she replied, pulling her suitcase toward the terminal entrance with a final wave. I spent the day focused on work, preparing documentation for a client portfolio review scheduled for Monday. Around 7 p.m., I ordered Chinese takeout and settled in for a quiet evening at home. As I ate my Kung Pao chicken, I had a sudden thought that made me smile. I should surprise Rachel with something nice at her hotel. We'd done this for each other during business trips before. Once she'd arranged for champagne to be waiting in my room when I checked in for a conference in San Diego that I decided to call the Marriott where the conference was being held and arrange for room service to deliver a bottle of her favorite Willamette Valley Pinot Noir and some chocolate-covered strawberries, a classic combination she loved. I looked up the hotel's number online and called the main line. Chicago Marriott downtown. How may I direct your call? A pleasant voice answered. Room service, please, I requested. After being transferred, I explained what I wanted to arrange for my wife, Rachel Reeves. Certainly, sir. Let me look up the guest to confirm the room number. The staff member said professionally. A moment of typing, then a pause. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't have a registration under that name. Is it possible the reservation is under another name? Could you check under Apex Innovations? It might be a corporate booking, I suggested, a faint uneasiness beginning to stir more. Typing. I'm not seeing any guests registered under that company name either, sir. That's strange. She's attending the National Marketing Association conference at your hotel this weekend. Another pause. Sir, we don't have any marketing conference scheduled here this weekend. Our main event is a dental association symposium. The uneasiness transformed instantly into a cold certainty that settled in my stomach like lead. I thanked the employee and hung up, my half-eaten dinner forgotten. My hands moved almost automatically as I opened my laptop and searched for information about the National Marketing Association conference Rachel had mentioned. It existed, but was scheduled for the following month in Atlanta, not Chicago in April. Something broke inside me at that moment. A fundamental trust that had been the bedrock of my adult life. I'm not proud of what I did next, but in that moment of crisis, I needed to know the truth more than I needed to preserve the normal boundaries of our relationship. I accessed our shared cloud account, which was linked to both our phones for automatic photo backup. Rachel didn't realize that this also enabled location tracking if the feature wasn't specifically disabled, and she had never been particularly tech-savvy beyond what her job required. With shaking hands, I navigated to the device location section and found her phone's current position. The map showed her not in Chicago, but right here in Massachusetts, specifically at the Langham, a luxury hotel in downtown Boston, less than 30 minutes from our home. The elegant five-star establishment was known for its sophisticated ambience and discretion, a perfect venue for an affair rather than legitimate business. I sat staring at the screen for several minutes, my mind cycling through possibilities. Perhaps there was a last-minute change of plans? Maybe she was meeting clients who had flown in from elsewhere? But why the elaborate lie about Chicago? And why tell me David would be in New York if they were both actually in Boston? I changed into a dark blue button-down shirt and slacks, nondescript enough to blend in at an upscale hotel, and drove downtown in a fog of disbelief and growing anger. Traffic was light on a Friday evening heading into the city rather than out of it, and I found parking in a garage 2 blocks from the Langham, heart pounding against my ribcage. I entered the hotel's opulent lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I didn't approach the reception desk. I had no plan to confront them in their room. Instead, I made my way to the elegant hotel restaurant, Bond, where the dinner service would be in full swing. I positioned myself at the bar, angled to see most of the dining room while remaining partially obscured by a decorative column. I ordered a scotch I didn't drink and waited, scanning each table methodically. The minutes stretched painfully as I questioned my sanity and what exactly I was doing there. Maybe the location tracking was wrong. Maybe I had become paranoid and was about to destroy my marriage over technological glitches and imagination. Then I saw them, in a secluded corner table partially hidden by an ornate floral arrangement sat Rachel and David Wilson. She wore a black dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in loose waves the way she wore it for special occasions. He leaned toward her, his hand resting on hers atop the white tablecloth, their fingers intertwined intimately. As I watched, frozen in place, Rachel laughed at something he said, her head tilting back slightly in the way that had always made my heart skip when directed at me. David raised his wine glass in a toast, his expression unmistakably adoring. They were not colleagues discussing business strategies. The body language, the atmosphere they created in their private bubble, the way her foot gently rubbed against his calf under the table. These were the gestures of lovers comfortable with each other's bodies, not business associates, with trembling hands, I discreetly took out my phone and captured several photos and short video clips from my vantage point. The evidence was grainy but clear enough to identify both of them and the nature of their interaction. I watched as they finished their meal, David paying the bill with what looked like a corporate credit card. Another betrayal, using company money to finance their rendezvous. When they stood to leave, I sank further back into the shadows. They walked close together through the lobby toward the elevators, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Just before they entered the elevator, he leaned down to kiss her, not a friendly peck, but a lingering, intimate exchange that confirmed beyond any doubt what was happening. The elevator doors closed on their embrace, taking them up to what was presumably a shared room. That I remained at the bar for another hour, ordering a second scotch that I actually drank this time, trying to process what I'd witnessed. My marriage, which I had believed was built on mutual respect and honesty, had been a facade for months. The woman I had trusted with my life, my future, and my heart had been systematically deceiving me while planning a family with me. The depth of the betrayal was staggering that I drove home in a state of numb shock, my mind already beginning to catalog and analyze what I knew and what options lay before me. I didn't confront them that night. A scene in the hotel would have been emotionally satisfying, but strategically foolish. Instead, I went home to the house that now felt like a stage set rather than a home, locked myself in my office, and began to plan. Rachel would return on Sunday evening as scheduled, supposedly, from Chicago. She would tell me about fictitious conference sessions and networking events. She would kiss me with the same lips that had been on another man. And I would pretend to believe her, for now. Because knowledge is power, and I intended to use that power precisely when and how it would be most effective. For 2 weeks following my discovery, I lived a carefully choreographed double life that would have impressed the most seasoned intelligence operative. On the surface, I maintained the appearance of a loving, unsuspecting husband, greeting Rachel with affection when she returned from Chicago, asking appropriate questions about the conference, and continuing our daily routines as though my world hadn't been shattered. How was the keynote speaker from Google? I asked casually over Sunday dinner after her return. Brilliant, she replied without hesitation, fabricating details about artificial intelligence applications in consumer targeting. Her case studies on predictive analytics were revolutionary. I've got pages of notes to implement. I nodded with interest, marveling at the ease with which she constructed elaborate fictions. Had she always been capable of such deception, or had this affair awakened a talent for duplicity I'd never witnessed before? Each lie she told, small details about Chicago's weather, anecdotes about conversations with colleagues who hadn't actually been there, complaints about delayed flights that had never existed, became another piece of evidence in my mental file. Beneath this facade of normalcy, I meticulously built my case and planned my strategy with the same precision I applied to complex financial analyses for my highest value clients. The first step was gathering incontrovertible evidence. The morning after discovering them at the Langham, I contacted Harrington Investigations, a private detective agency with excellent reviews and a reputation for discretion. I met with James Harrington himself, a former Boston police detective, with 30 years of experience, in a coffee shop far from my usual haunts. I need documentation of an affair, I told him plainly after signing his confidentiality agreement. Photos, videos, timestamps, hotel receipts, anything that would stand up in court. Harrington nodded without judgment. Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state, but evidence like this can be relevant in property division if it demonstrates wasting of marital assets or in negotiations. We'll be thorough. Does the suspected affair involve travel or regular patterns? I provided him with Rachel's work schedule, David's information, and patterns I'd observed, including their apparent preference for luxury hotels rather than either of their homes. They're using company resources, I explained. Business trips that aren't actually business, expense accounts, company time. That adds another dimension we can document, Harrington noted. Corporate misuse could create additional leverage. 4. The next 10 days, Harrington and his team conducted surveillance, providing me with daily updates and a growing file of damning evidence. They photographed Rachel and David entering the Langham again the following Wednesday, documented a weekend trip to Newport, Rhode Island that Rachel had told me was a girls' weekend, with her college friends, and even captured them having lunch at L'Espalier, where David paid with his company credit card. Meanwhile, I focused on financial preparation. I met with our financial advisor under the guise of reviewing our investment strategy, but used the opportunity to gain a comprehensive understanding of our assets, account structures, and retirement funds. I systematically downloaded statements from all joint accounts, documented the value of our home and other properties, and created spreadsheets tracking our expenses over the previous 5 years. That a critical discovery came when reviewing our credit card statements in detail. Rachel had opened a separate card 6 months earlier that I hadn't known about, using our home address but her office email for statements. By accessing our mail before I saw it and managing the account online, she had kept it hidden. When I obtained those statements through our online banking portal, I found charges for lingerie, hotel rooms under her name when she was supposedly elsewhere, and gifts purchased for David, including an engraved watch worth over $3,000 that I consulted with the top 3 divorce attorneys in Boston before selecting Catherine Brennan, known for her ruthless efficiency and strategic brilliance in high-asset divorces. Our initial consultation lasted 3 hours as I presented my preliminary evidence and financial documentation. "You've done more preparation than most clients who've been planning divorce for months," Catherine remarked, examining my organized files. "What exactly are you hoping to achieve here?" "Justice," I replied simply. "Not just a favorable settlement, but consequences for both of them. They've betrayed not just me, but David's family and their company's trust." Catherine leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Revenge is an expensive and often unsatisfying pursuit, Mr. Reeves. Are you sure that's what you want rather than a clean break?" "I want what I'm entitled to after a decade of building a life with someone who was planning a future with me while sleeping with her colleague," I said. "And I want them to face the natural consequences of their choices." She nodded slowly. "Then we'll need to be strategic about timing and approach. Massachusetts courts generally aim for equitable distribution, but judges have discretion. The corporate misuse angle actually gives us additional leverage outside of family court." Over the next several days, I carefully withdrew reasonable amounts of cash from our joint accounts, enough to cover my expenses for several months, but not so much that Rachel would notice or that could be construed as dissipation of assets. I opened a new account at a different bank using my office address for correspondence and began transferring personal items of sentimental or significant financial value, family heirlooms, documents, and irreplaceable photographs, to a safe deposit box. That I also began quietly networking within Rachel's industry circles, building relationships with people who would be useful later. I accepted invitations to business mixers and charity events I would normally have declined, using these opportunities to connect with executives from competing companies and establishing myself as a respected figure independent of Rachel's professional identity. I was particularly careful to develop a rapport with Apex Innovation's Chief Financial Officer, Thomas Chun, and the Head of Human Resources, Vanessa Morris, both of whom I met at a Chamber of Commerce fundraiser. Rachel speaks so highly of the culture at Apex, I mentioned to Vanessa during our conversation, especially the emphasis on ethical business practices that must require robust policies around things like expense reporting and workplace relationships. "Absolutely," Vanessa confirmed. "We implemented comprehensive conflict of interest policies last year after some issues in the San Francisco office. All executives sign ethics agreements annually now." This information confirmed what I had suspected. Rachel and David weren't just betraying their spouses. They were violating company policies that could have professional consequences. Throughout this period, I maintained detailed records of Rachel's absences, inconsistencies in her stories, and evidence of her affair in a secure cloud account accessible only from a separate email address created specifically for this purpose. I purchased a new laptop that remained locked in my office at work, never bringing it home where Rachel might discover it. The most challenging aspect of this preparation phase was maintaining emotional control. Each morning as I kissed her goodbye, each evening as we shared meals and she told me about her day, strategically editing out the parts spent with David, I had to resist the urge to confront her. There were moments when the anger threatened to overwhelm me, when watching her check her phone and smile secretly became almost unbearable. During these times, I would excuse myself to work on client reports in my home office, where I could review the growing evidence file or consult with Catherine about strategy. The methodical process of planning became a form of therapy, channeling my rage and hurt into productive action rather than destructive confrontation. After 2 weeks of this double life, with surveillance photos showing Rachel and David checking into the Four Seasons for what was supposed to be her business trip to Denver, I decided it was time to implement the first phase of my plan. I had sufficient evidence, legal preparation, and financial security to begin the process that would dismantle the comfortable deception they had constructed. The private investigator had provided me with comprehensive information about David's wife, Elaine Wilson. A former pharmaceutical sales representative with a degree in biology, she had left her career to raise their 2 children, now ages 8 and 11. She volunteered at their private school and served on the board of a local children's charity. She and David lived in a 5,000-square-foot home in Brookline that they had purchased 7 years ago for $2.30 million. But what the investigator also discovered was that the deed to their house was solely in Elaine's name, apparently a gift from her wealthy parents as a wedding present. This detail would prove significant in how events unfolded. With all pieces in place, I was ready to execute a strategy designed to deliver maximum impact while protecting my own interests. The social dismantling would come first, followed by the legal and financial reckoning. I had lived with betrayal for weeks. Now it was time for Rachel and David to face the consequences of their choices. The implementation of what I now thought of as Phase 1 began on a Wednesday evening when Rachel informed me she would be working late to prepare for an important client presentation. This had become such a common excuse that she delivered it with casual confidence, clearly expecting no resistance. "Don't wait up," she added, kissing my cheek before leaving that morning. "These strategy sessions always run late, and we might grab dinner after." "Good luck with the presentation," I replied with practiced sincerity. "Text me when you're heading home." As soon as her car pulled out of our driveway, I contacted James Harrington to confirm surveillance was in place. By noon, he sent me photos of Rachel meeting David for lunch at an intimate French bistro downtown. Their affection obvious even in still images as they held hands across the table and shared dessert from the same plate at Petit 4:30 p.m. Harrington's associate tracked them to the Liberty Hotel, an upscale establishment converted from a historic prison, an irony not lost on me given what was about to unfold. They checked in under David's name, with Rachel carrying an overnight bag I recognized from our own weekend getaways. The time had come to shatter their carefully constructed secret world. I had prepared a comprehensive digital package containing select evidence of the affair, photos of them entering hotels together, timestamped to match days Rachel had claimed to be working or out of town, screenshots of text messages the investigator had legally obtained showing explicit communications between them, credit card statements showing Rachel's purchases of lingerie and gifts for dates with David, and expense reports David had submitted for business dinners and client meetings that were actually romantic rendezvous. I also included documentation of company policy violations, including Apex Innovation's explicit rules against undisclosed romantic relationships between managers and direct reports, which Rachel technically was, through a dotted line reporting structure, and misuse of company funds for personal expenses that I had carefully considered how to present this information. A public social media exposure might have been satisfying, but would have damaged innocent parties, including David's children, and potentially opened me to legal issues. Instead, I opted for a targeted approach that would create a controlled cascade of consequences. My first action was sending carefully selected evidence to Elaine Wilson via a secure, anonymous email platform. I avoided overwhelming her with explicit content or unnecessary detail, focusing instead on irrefutable proof, photos of them entering hotels, receipts showing David using household funds for gifts to Rachel, and a timeline of their affair that corresponded with business trips and late meetings. I included a compassionate note explaining that I believed she deserved to know, just as I had wanted to know, and expressing my regret that we were both victims of our spouse's deception. I also noted, truthfully, that I had only discovered the affair recently myself and was still determining my own path forward. I provided my personal email address if she wished to communicate, though I emphasized there was no obligation to do so. The email was timed to arrive at 6:30 p.m., When my investigator confirmed the children would be at their weekly swim team practice based on social media posts about their schedule. This timing was deliberate, giving Elaine privacy to process the information without her children present, but also ensuring David wouldn't have returned home yet to potentially intercept the message. Her response came faster than I expected. At 7:15 p.m., my phone pinged with an email notification. Michael, I've suspected something for months, but couldn't prove it. Thank you for having the decency to share this information directly rather than making it public. I've already contacted our family lawyer. Would like to speak with you when you're ready, Elaine. By 8:45 p.m., Harrington reported a flurry of activity. David had received multiple urgent calls from Elaine while at the hotel with Rachel. Security cameras showed him hastily leaving the building alone. His expression panicked as he took a phone call in the lobby. Rachel remained behind, presumably unaware of the unfolding situation. Within hours, their perfect little bubble imploded with breathtaking speed. According to my investigator, David arrived home to find the locks changed and a manila envelope taped to the door containing temporary custody arrangements for the children, who were staying with Elaine's parents. By 11 p.m., Elaine had updated her relationship status on social media to complicated and posted a cryptic but pointed message: the truth always emerges. Grateful for those who believe in honesty. Her sister, with fewer reservations about discretion, was more explicit in her own post, tagging mutual friends and family. Supporting my sister through the devastating discovery of her husband's long-term affair with a coworker. Some people deserve every bit of what's coming to them. The digital avalanche had begun. By morning, dozens of comments expressing support for Elaine appeared across her social media platforms, with several mutual friends and family members unfriending David. His brother-in-law, an influential executive at a partner company of Apex Innovations, posted a thinly veiled comment about betrayal extending beyond family to professional ethics. For Rachel's circle, I was more methodically calculated. I didn't broadcast anything publicly at first, maintaining my role as the unaware husband. Instead, I moved to the professional dimension of their deception. Using a secure anonymous email account different from the one I had used to contact Elaine, I sent a detailed report to Thomas Chun, the CFO of Apex Innovations, documenting the misuse of company funds. The email was framed as coming from a concerned employee who had witnessed inappropriate behavior and was worried about financial impropriety. I included specific expense reports with dates and amounts, hotel receipts showing both Rachel and David's names, and timestamps proving these business meetings were actually extended romantic encounters that I also sent a separate communication to Vanessa Morris in HR, focusing on the policy violations regarding undisclosed relationships between managers and subordinates. This package included photos of them in clearly romantic situations during business hours and at company events, alongside sections of the employee handbook that explicitly prohibited such relationships without disclosure and recusal from supervisory decisions. Both emails emphasized the potential liability for the company should these activities become public knowledge, particularly given Apex's pending acquisition by a larger, more conservative corporation, a detail Rachel had mentioned during dinner conversations. The response from Apex was swift and decisive. By Monday morning, both Rachel and David were summoned to separate meetings with HR and senior leadership. Rachel left the house that morning in high spirits, dressed immaculately in her favorite power suit, completely unaware of what awaited her. I later learned through connections at her company that the meetings had been brutally efficient. Both were presented with irrefutable evidence of their misconduct, placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation, and escorted from the building by security, a humiliating procession witnessed by colleagues they had worked alongside. For years, Rachel called me at 11:30 a.m., her voice trembling. Something terrible has happened. I've been suspended from work. Can you come home? Suspended? What? I asked, feigning confusion and concern while signaling to my assistant to cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. It's all a misunderstanding, she said, her voice breaking. Someone sent photos to HR, private photos of me and David. They're making ridiculous accusations about company resources and policy violations. I need you right now. I'll be right there, I promised, allowing genuine emotion to color my voice for the first time in weeks. The difference was that while she heard concern, what I actually felt was a cold satisfaction that justice was beginning to unfold. When I arrived home 30 minutes later, I found Rachel pacing in our living room, her makeup streaked from crying, still wearing her elegant suit, but with an air of dishevelment that revealed her internal chaos. She rushed into my arms as I entered. "Thank God you're here," she sobbed against my shoulder. "Everything's falling apart." I held her, experiencing the surreal sensation of comforting the very person who had caused my own suffering. "Tell me what happened," I said quietly, guiding her to the sofa. What followed was a masterclass in selective storytelling as Rachel attempted to construct a narrative that would explain the evidence without admitting the affair. According to her version, she and David had become close friends through work projects, occasionally sharing meals or drinks to discuss strategies. Someone at the company, jealous of their successful partnership, had misinterpreted their friendship and doctored photos to make it appear romantic. They even claimed we were using company money for personal expenses, she said indignantly. "It's completely false. Every meal, every hotel conference room we booked was for legitimate business purposes." I listened attentively, nodding at appropriate moments, maintaining my supportive facade while inwardly cataloging each lie. When she finally paused for breath, I asked the question that would begin to unravel her carefully crafted fiction. "Rachel," I said gently, taking her hand, "if these accusations are based on misunderstandings and doctored images, why did David's wife change the locks on their house last night?" Her face froze, color draining from her cheeks as she processed the implication of my question. How? Do you know about Elaine?" "One of my clients works with David's brother-in-law," I improvised smoothly. "He mentioned there was some family drama happening. Something about evidence of an affair being sent to Elaine." Rachel's composure cracked visibly. She withdrew her hand from mine and stood up, moving toward the window as though needing physical distance. "It's not what you think," she said, her back to me. "David and Elaine have been having problems for years. They've practically been separated." "That's interesting," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Because just last month at the company gala, you told me they were planning a vow renewal ceremony for their 15th anniversary. You said Elaine was looking at venues in Nantucket." She flinched as her own words came back to contradict her. When she turned to face me, her expression had shifted from devastation to calculation. I could almost see her mind racing, looking for a new angle, a way to salvage her crumbling narrative. "Michael," she began, her voice taking on a softer, more intimate quality as she moved toward me. "You know how committed I am to you, to our marriage. Whatever you've heard, whatever you think you know, I know enough." I interrupted, no longer able to maintain the charade. "I know about the Langham when you were supposedly in Chicago. I know about Newport when you claimed to be with your college friends. I know about the lingerie you bought that I never saw and the watch you gave him for his birthday." Her eyes widened with each revelation. "You've been spying on me?" she asked, attempting to shift to indignation. "I've been learning the truth," I corrected calmly. "Something you should have had the decency to tell me before planning a family together while sleeping with your colleague." The mention of our family plans seemed to hit her with particular force. She sank onto the edge of a chair, momentarily speechless. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to understand." This wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a deliberate double life. I stood up, needing physical distance myself now. "I've already spoken with a divorce attorney. I think you should find somewhere else to stay while we sort out the legal details. You can't just throw me out of my own house," she protested, anger finally breaking through her shock. "Actually, I can," I informed her. "The rental agreement is in my name alone since we used my credit history to secure it. You have until tomorrow evening to pack your essentials. My attorney will contact yours regarding the rest of your belongings." This was technically true. The lease had been signed with me as the primary tenant based on my superior credit score at the time, though we had always considered the house equally ours. It was a detail I had confirmed with my attorney specifically, to ensure I had legal grounds to remain in the home during divorce proceedings. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, a note of panic entering her voice as the reality of her situation began to sink in. "Perhaps David has room at whatever hotel he's staying in," I suggested coolly. "Since you've been sharing accommodations already, it seems like a logical solution." Her face hardened at my words, the last pretense of innocence abandoned. You did this deliberately, didn't you? The anonymous tips to HR, to Elaine, that was you. I simply ensured that the truth came to light. I replied. The consequences you're facing are the result of choices you and David made, not my actions. She studied me with newfound wariness, as though seeing me clearly for the first time in our relationship. I never thought you could be this calculating. And I never thought you could betray every promise we made to each other. I countered. It seems we both misjudged each other's capacity for certain behaviors. The remainder of that day and the next unfolded in a tense choreography of practical separations. Rachel moved between anger, bargaining, and occasional attempts at emotional manipulation, reminding me of our history together, suggesting we consider counseling, even attempting to seduce me in a desperate bid to reestablish connection. I maintained my emotional distance throughout, focusing on logistical details rather than engaging with her tactics. By Thursday evening, she had packed several suitcases and arranged to stay with her sister in Cambridge temporarily. As she loaded the last bag into her car, she made one final attempt to appeal to me. 10 years together, and you're throwing it away without even trying to work through this, she said accusingly. Don't you think we at least owe our marriage that much? I looked at her steadily, allowing myself to fully feel the pain and betrayal that had been driving my actions. Our marriage ended the moment you decided to live a double life, Rachel. I just didn't know it yet. The woman I married wouldn't have been capable of sustained deception or using our plans for a family as a cover while building a relationship with someone else. I don't know who you are anymore, but I know I deserve better than lies. Something in my tone must have conveyed the finality of my decision because she didn't argue further. With a last look at the house that had been our home, she got into her car and drove away, leaving me alone with the hollow victory of reclaimed space. The social fallout continued to expand in concentric circles throughout the following weeks. Rachel's closest friends initially rallied around her, accepting her version of events until I selectively shared evidence with those I knew valued honesty above loyalty. Her college roommate Lisa, who had been my friend as well, was particularly devastated by the revelations, having herself been betrayed by a former fiancé years earlier. I defended her to everyone. Lisa told me tearfully over coffee. She swore. To me it was all exaggerated, that you were being vindictive because of some misunderstanding. I feel like such a fool. You weren't a fool, I assured her. You were being a good friend based on the information you had. That's admirable, even if the person didn't deserve your loyalty. Within the broader social circle, people inevitably took sides. Some mutual friends attempted to maintain relationships with both of us, an awkward balancing act that rarely succeeded. Others distanced themselves from the situation entirely, uncomfortable with the messiness of our dissolution. Professional acquaintances and neighbors who had known us as the perfect couple now viewed me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity, their perceptions forever altered. For David and Rachel, the professional consequences were equally devastating. Apex Innovations' investigation concluded with their termination for multiple policy violations, including misappropriation of company funds and failure to disclose a relationship that constituted a conflict of interest. The timing couldn't have been worse for them. The company's pending acquisition meant heightened scrutiny of all employees, with the acquiring corporation making examples of their case in updated ethics training. Word of their misconduct spread quickly through industry channels, with Rachel's carefully cultivated professional reputation now tarnished by whispers of impropriety and poor judgment. Several speaking engagements she had scheduled at marketing conferences were quietly canceled. David faced similar professional ostracism, with former colleagues distancing themselves to avoid association with the scandal. By the end of the first month, the social and professional dimensions of their lives had been fundamentally altered. They were no longer respected professionals with bright futures, but cautionary tales discussed in hushed tones. Their affair, begun in secrecy and excitement, now existed under the harsh spotlight of public judgment, stripped of its romance and exposed for the selfish choice it had always been. As this phase of my plan concluded, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The social destruction had unfolded more completely than even I had anticipated, creating a foundation for the legal and financial reckonings still to come. Yet the hollow feeling in my chest remained. Justice was being served, but it couldn't restore what had been lost. The trust, the shared dreams, the future I had believed in so completely that I hadn't just lost a wife. I had lost the narrative of my own life, the certainty of what the next chapters would hold. As I sat alone in our house, surrounded by physical reminders of the relationship that had defined my adult life, I understood that my revenge, however, meticulously planned and executed, was only the beginning of a longer process of rebuilding myself from the ground up. With the social edifice of Rachel and David's affair in ruins, I turned my attention to the financial dimensions of our separation. This aspect required even more precision and strategic patience than the social exposure had. Massachusetts as an equitable distribution state rather than a strict community property jurisdiction offered both challenges and opportunities in divorce proceedings. Equitable did not necessarily mean equal, but rather what the court deemed fair based on various factors, including misconduct that affected family finances. Catherine Brennan, my divorce attorney, had prepared thoroughly during the weeks leading up to Rachel's departure from our home. We had documented all marital assets, tracked the timeline of Rachel's financial misconduct, and prepared comprehensive arguments for why certain divisions would be most equitable given the circumstances. "We're in a strong position," Catherine assured me during our strategy meeting in her corner office overlooking Boston Harbor. "The evidence of financial misconduct is particularly compelling. Using joint funds to purchase expensive gifts for her affair partner, opening secret credit accounts, and lying about business expenses. These all constitute dissipation of marital assets." "And the company termination?" I asked, reviewing the timeline we had constructed. "How does that factor in?" "Significantly in our favor," she replied, tapping her pen against the document. "Rachel's misconduct directly resulted in the loss of her income, which negatively impacts the marital estate. Courts take a dim view of actions that deliberately or recklessly reduce the financial position of either party during divorce proceedings. Our opening position in negotiations was aggressive but defensible. I sought 70% of our joint assets, the house, and my entire retirement account intact. This was more than I realistically expected to receive in a final settlement, but it established a strong anchor point for negotiations. Rachel, meanwhile, had retained Martin Goldstein, a divorce attorney known for his aggressive tactics and emotional approach. His initial counter was equally extreme: 60% of assets to Rachel, alimony based on my current income rather than her previous earnings, and forced sale of the house with equal division of proceeds. What Goldstein didn't anticipate was how meticulously we had prepared for this financial battle. Catherine had three key advantages in negotiations: complete and accurate financial documentation, evidence of Rachel's financial misconduct, and my relative financial stability compared to Rachel's newly precarious position. When we met for the first settlement conference, Goldstein arrived with Rachel, both projecting confidence that quickly faltered as Catherine methodically presented our evidence. For each claim Goldstein made, Catherine countered with dated documentation. When he claimed Rachel had contributed equally to household expenses, Catherine produced 5 years of bank statements showing my contributions had exceeded Rachel's by approximately 60%, despite our similar incomes. When he argued Rachel needed substantial support to maintain her standard of living, Catherine presented evidence that Rachel was already living with David in a luxury apartment, effectively reducing her housing costs. When he demanded half of my retirement account, Catherine reminded him of Rachel's secret credit card, the $3,000 watch purchased for David, and the thousands spent on hotels and meals during their affair, all constituting dissipation of marital assets that would be offset against any claim to my retirement funds. Throughout this process, I maintained rigid control over my emotions, presenting as calm and reasonable while Rachel visibly struggled. During one particularly tense exchange, she burst into tears, accusing me of financial vindictiveness designed to punish her. "Mr. Reeves is not seeking punishment," Catherine responded coolly. "He's seeking equitable distribution that accounts for Ms. Reeves' choices and their financial impact on the marital estate." The documentation speaks for itself. Martin Goldstein, recognizing the weakness of their position, requested a recess to confer with his client. When they returned, their approach had noticeably softened. We're prepared to discuss a more moderate division, he offered, sliding a revised proposal across the table. The negotiations continued for several weeks, with multiple conferences and exchanges of proposals. Throughout this process, Rachel's financial position continued to deteriorate. Despite her impressive resume, her termination for ethical violations had made finding comparable employment challenging. Several promising interviews ended abruptly when reference checks revealed the circumstances of her departure from Apex Innovations. David faced similar professional obstacles, compounded by the divorce proceedings Elaine had initiated. Because the family home was solely in her name, a wedding gift from her parents, and she had strong evidence of his infidelity and financial misconduct, his housing situation was precarious. The expensive apartment he and Rachel had leased together strained their reduced resources. By contrast, I had maintained my professional standing, continued advancing at my firm, and preserved my reputation as someone who had been wronged rather than someone who had committed wrongdoing. This disparity in our situations created increasing pressure on Rachel to settle rather than proceed to a potentially costly trial. 6 weeks into negotiations, we reached a settlement agreement that, while not as aggressive as my opening position, was substantially more favorable than a standard division would have been. I retained the house and full ownership of my retirement accounts. Our investment portfolio was divided 65/35 in my favor. Rachel kept her personal retirement account, but was responsible for the entirety of the debt on her secret credit card. Each of us retained our personal vehicles and personal property. Neither party would pay alimony to the other. When Rachel signed the settlement agreement in Catherine's conference room, her hand trembled slightly. She looked across the table at me, searching for some sign of the man who had loved her for a decade. "I hope this makes you happy," she said quietly as the lawyers stepped out momentarily to make copies. "Happiness wasn't the goal," I replied. "Honestly, fairness was." "Is any of this really fair?" she asked, gesturing to the stack of documents that represented the dissolution of our life together. "We both lost everything we built." "No," I agreed. "But choices have consequences. These are yours." She looked away, unable to hold my gaze. "And what about your choice to systematically destroy my life, rather than just divorcing me when you found out? What consequences do you face for that?" "I live with those every day," I said simply. "The difference is that I can look in the mirror knowing I didn't betray someone who trusted me completely." The divorce was finalized 3 months after Rachel moved out of our home. The document that ended our marriage was remarkably brief considering the years and emotions it encompassed. Just a series of legal paragraphs confirming the termination of our union and the division of our assets. For David and Rachel, the financial aftermath continued long after my direct involvement ended. Through mutual connections, I learned that David's divorce had been even more financially devastating than Rachel's. Elaine had leveraged his infidelity and financial misconduct effectively, securing primary custody of their children and substantial child support payments based on his previous income. Despite his current unemployment, the luxury apartment Rachel and David had leased became unsustainable within months. They downsized to a smaller place in a less desirable neighborhood, a tangible reminder of how quickly their circumstances had changed. Rachel eventually found employment with a smaller marketing firm at approximately 60% of her previous salary, while David took a position with a startup at a similar reduction in compensation. The financial trajectory of their lives had been permanently altered, not by malice or vengeance on my part, but by the natural consequences of their own actions. The affair that had seemed worth risking everything for had, indeed, cost them nearly everything. 1 year after discovering Rachel's betrayal, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown Boston condominium, watching the harbor lights shimmer against the evening sky. I had sold our house in Lexington 6 months earlier, unable to find comfort in spaces filled with memories of a life built on illusions. The proceeds had allowed me to purchase this sleek, modern space that bore no resemblance to the colonial architecture Rachel had always preferred. The transformation extended beyond my living situation. I had accepted a partnership offer at a competing financial firm, increasing my compensation by 35% and expanding my client portfolio significantly. My wardrobe had evolved from conservative suits to more contemporary styling that better reflected my current self. I had even adopted a rescue dog, a 3-year-old retriever mix named Archer who now dozed contentedly on his bed in the corner of my living room. These external changes mirrored deeper internal shifts. The methodical, patient financial consultant was still there, but now balanced by a more assertive presence that no longer deferred important decisions to maintain harmony. I had developed a clearer sense of personal boundaries and expectations in relationships. The trauma of betrayal had forced a complete reassessment of who I was and what I wanted from life. A painful but ultimately transformative process that my social circle had contracted then expanded in new directions. Some friendships had not survived. The divorce, particularly those with couples who had been closer to Rachel or who found the details of our separation too uncomfortable to navigate. Other relationships had strengthened as friends rallied around me during the most difficult periods. I had also formed new connections through my changed circumstances, fellow dog owners in my building, colleagues at my new firm, members of a hiking group I joined to fill formerly empty weekends. Dating had been a more complicated territory to navigate. For the first 6 months after the divorce, I had avoided romantic entanglements entirely, focusing instead on rebuilding my sense of self. When I finally accepted a dinner invitation from Claire, a corporate attorney I'd met through professional channels, I discovered that trust remained my most significant challenge. Each unanswered text triggered disproportionate anxiety. Every unexplained schedule change awakened suspicion. Claire had been patient until she wasn't. "I'm not Rachel," she told me during what would be our final conversation. "I can't be in a relationship where I'm constantly proving my trustworthiness because someone else broke your faith." Her assessment was fair, and her departure became another important lesson in my recovery. That healing would need to be substantially complete before I could offer a new partner my undamaged self. As for Rachel and David, their story had continued to evolve in ways both expected and surprising. Their relationship had survived the initial devastation, though transformed by circumstance. They now lived in a modest apartment in Somerville, both working at positions below their previous professional standing. According to mutual acquaintances, they had married in a small civil ceremony 6 months after our divorce was finalized, with only a handful of friends attending. A stark contrast to the elaborate celebration Rachel had once envisioned for herself. That David's relationship with his children had been particularly affected by his choices. His visitation schedule was strictly limited and supervised initially, gradually expanding as he demonstrated consistency and responsibility. The dynamic with his ex-wife remained strained, their communication restricted to co-parenting logistics, managed primarily through a family coordinator appointed by the court. Rachel had attempted to reconcile with her family, who had been shocked and disappointed by her actions. Her parents, traditional and religious people who viewed marriage as a sacred commitment, had struggled to accept her choices. Her relationship with her sister had been more resilient, gradually rebuilding through consistent effort on both sides. Many of her friendships had not recovered, the social consequences of the affair creating permanent divisions. That I had no direct contact with either of them after the divorce was finalized, establishing firm boundaries through our respective attorneys. However, Boston's professional circles were ultimately limited, and occasional passive updates inevitably reached me. I learned that Rachel had started volunteering with a literacy program at a community center, perhaps seeking some form of redemption or positive contribution to balance her personal ledger. David had reportedly become more involved in his children's activities as restrictions eased, coaching his son's soccer team and rarely missing a school event. These glimpses into their reconstructed lives evoked complicated emotions. The raw anger that had fueled my strategic response to their betrayal had gradually subsided, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of human frailty and the capacity for both terrible mistakes and genuine growth. I did not regret my actions. The exposure of their affair had been a natural consequence of their choices rather than an act of malice on my part. Yet neither did I take pleasure in their ongoing struggles. On this particular evening, standing in my new home with the tangible symbols of my rebuilt life around me, I received an unexpected email from Rachel, the first direct communication since our divorce. "Michael, I've written and deleted this message 100 times over the past year. Nothing I can say will undo what happened or change how our story ended. But as I continue my own journey of accountability and growth, I couldn't move forward without acknowledging the pain I caused you. What I did was unforgivable. The choices I made destroyed something precious and irreplaceable. Not a day passes that I don't regret the hurt I inflicted on someone who gave me nothing but honesty and support for a decade that I won't ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned that right. I simply want you to know that I understand the magnitude of my betrayal and accept full responsibility for it. You deserved better than what I gave you, that I hope you found peace and happiness in your new life. From what I occasionally hear, it seems you have. That knowledge gives me some small comfort amid the consequences I continue to face. That Rachel, I read the message 3 times, searching my emotional landscape for the response it triggered. A year earlier, such a communication would have reignited anger or perhaps satisfied my desire for acknowledgement of the harm done. Now, it generated a more muted reaction, recognition of her attempt at amends without any obligation to validate it. After careful consideration, I composed a brief reply. Rachel, thank you for your email. I appreciate your acknowledgement of what happened between us. That I've rebuilt my life in ways that bring me fulfillment and peace. I hope you continue to find your way forward as well. McKelly clicked send, then turned away from the screen to focus on the harbor view. Archer stirred from his bed, sensing my shift in attention, and padded over to rest his head against my leg. I scratched behind his ears absently, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The revenge I had orchestrated had served its purpose, ensuring that justice in some form was served and that I emerged from the dissolution of my marriage with my dignity and financial security intact. Yet the true healing had come not from watching consequences unfold for Rachel and David, but from the gradual, deliberate reconstruction of my own identity and life. That I had learned that betrayal of that magnitude changes you permanently, but that the transformation, while initially shaped by pain, doesn't have to be defined by it forever. The calculating precision I had applied to exposing their affair had evolved into something more balanced, a clearer understanding of my own values, stronger boundaries, and a refusal to settle for relationships built on anything less than complete honesty. As the last light faded from the sky, I turned away from the window to fully inhabit my present rather than looking backward. Tomorrow would bring client meetings, a lunch with a new friend from my hiking group, and an evening appointment with my therapist, the ordinary components of a life rebuilt from ruins. The revenge had been necessary for my sense of justice, but it was the reconstruction that had ultimately mattered most. In destroying what was false, I had created space for something authentic to take root and grow. That, perhaps, was the most complete form of justice, not just the downfall of those who had wronged me, but my own rise from the ashes they had left behind. 5 years after the divorce, I found myself at an industry conference in San Francisco, representing my firm's expanded West Coast operations. During a networking reception at the Fairmont Hotel, I glanced across the crowded atrium and saw a familiar profile at the bar. Rachel, engaged in conversation with a colleague I didn't recognize. She had aged well, though fine lines now framed her eyes and mouth, and subtle strands of gray threaded through her still auburn hair. Her professional attire was less expensive than what she once wore, but suited her with an understated elegance. She laughed at something her companion said, the same musical sound I remembered from our early days together. For a moment, I considered avoiding the encounter, slipping away before she noticed me. But something in me, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a desire for closure, perhaps simply confidence in my own healing, made me stay. When she turned slightly and our eyes met across the room, I saw the flash of recognition, followed by uncertainty about how to proceed. That I nodded slightly, acknowledging her presence without invitation or rejection. After a brief hesitation, she excused herself from her conversation partner and made her way toward me, navigating between cocktail tables with the social grace she had always possessed. Michael, she said simply as she approached, her voice carrying a complex mixture of emotions. You look well. So do you. I replied truthfully. I didn't expect to see you here. I'm representing Green Path Solutions now, she explained, referring to a mid-sized sustainability consulting firm. We're launching a new marketing platform for environmental compliance tracking. Congratulations, I said. That sounds meaningful. Hey. Slightly awkward silence fell between us. Two people who had once shared everything now searching for safe, conversational territory. Are you still in Boston? She asked finally. Yes, though I travel frequently now. We opened offices in San Francisco and Austin last year. I gestured toward a colleague across the room. Emma over there heads our West Coast operations. I'm just here for quarterly reviews and this conference. Rachel nodded, twisting the simple band on her left ring finger, a nervous gesture I remembered. Well, David and I are still together, she offered, answering the question I hadn't asked. It hasn't been easy, but we've built something stable. His kids are teenagers now. They spend every other weekend with us. I'm glad they have that relationship, I said, finding that I genuinely meant it. Children shouldn't suffer permanently for their parents' mistakes. And you? She asked hesitantly. Are you engaged? I replied, thinking of Melissa waiting for me back in Boston, planning our wedding for the following spring. To a pediatric oncologist. We met through a hospital fundraiser my firm sponsors. That's wonderful, Rachel said with what appeared to be genuine warmth. You deserve happiness, Michael. You always did. Another silence fell, this one charged with the weight of our shared history and divergent paths. Finally, Rachel spoke. Again, her voice quieter than before. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? If I hadn't. She trailed off, unable to complete the thought that I considered her question carefully before answering. Sometimes. But imagining alternate versions of the past isn't particularly useful. We're here now, shaped by what actually happened. She nodded. Slowly. I've had a lot of time to think about why I made the choices I did. Years of therapy, trying to understand what was broken in me that I could hurt someone I genuinely loved. And I asked, curious despite myself. No simple answers. Fear of being truly known, perhaps. Or the intoxication of secrecy after years. Of predictability. She shook her head slightly. None of it justifies what I did. But understanding it has helped me become someone who wouldn't make those same choices again. I studied her face, looking for traces of the woman I had married in this older, seemingly wiser version. She met my gaze steadily, neither asking for forgiveness nor avoiding accountability. I hope that's true, I said finally. Growth is the only good thing that can come from causing pain. My colleague signaled from across the room, indicating it was time for our scheduled dinner with potential clients. I nodded acknowledgement before turning back to Rachel. I should go, I said, gesturing toward my waiting associates. Of course. She extended her hand formally, a gesture that acknowledged the distance between us now. It was good to see you, Michael. Take care of yourself. I clasped her hand briefly, feeling nothing but the normal warmth of human contact. No lingering attachment, no surge of anger or pain. You too, Rachel. As I walked away toward my colleagues and the future I had built, I realized that the emotional weight I had carried for so long had finally, fully dissipated. The revenge I had executed years earlier had served its purpose in the moment, providing justice when the normal structures of life had failed to do so. But true healing had come from the life I had constructed afterward, founded on hard-won wisdom and authentic connections. Rachel and I had each reaped the consequences of our respective choices. She, the betrayal that had damaged so many lives. I, the calculated response that had ensured accountability. We had both been transformed by that crucible of destruction and reconstruction. Now, 5 years later, we were simply two people with a complicated past, moving along separate paths that had briefly, consequentially intersected. As I joined my colleagues and turned my attention to the business at hand, I felt no need to look back again. The chapter had closed long ago. The story that mattered now was the one still being written, page by page, choice by choice. My own. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of betrayal and its consequences. Remember, these stories are shared not to promote vengeance, but to illustrate the human capacity for resilience in the face of profound betrayal. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.